Alright, so whenever I make a video like this, there's usually two major camps that exist. The first being those that feel emboldened by any sort of criticism towards Temtem and thus proceed to write in great detail how terrible they think the game is, and those that get super offended by the fact that I'm not just sucking it off. It kind of reminds me of the Pokemon fan base in that regard, but you also have the third camp that are just everyone else that is reasonable. But if you're part of one of those two camps, have fun fighting in the comments, because today I want to discuss what a lot of you guys are saying that you want to see from Temtem in the long term, and it very much does not align with the current developer outlook or even major sect of the most hardcore fans within the community, and I want to discuss this. So basically what I'm going on about is that Temtem is in fact an MMO, and MMOs require constant maintenance and server costs in order to continue to exist. As of such, said games need at least a decent sized player base in order to fund them. If there's nobody playing the game, or there just are a small few that don't contribute enough financially to the server costs, the game then becomes unviable. That being said, a lot of people like to either use concurrent Temtem players as a way to bash on the game or just ignore them entirely, and I don't think either approach is conducive to a constructive discussion. Temtem needs a dedicated player base in order to continue to exist, and it's no secret that the game gets very quiet during non-update phases. Now, the reason this video is even a thing is because the Temtem developers have stated on numerous occasions that their plans for the game are to continue to add new features, balancing adjustments, but not to add new islands in Temtem. This, of course, is something that they said could change, but when discussing this in one of my past videos, and I do apologize, I cannot remember where I saw this comment, but if you're watching, please let me know if this was you. But essentially what someone said was they felt like Crema was only appealing to a tiny percentage of their fan base by following this model, and if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. The vast majority of players are going to come back for island updates and new Temtem, while balancing and adding new features and tournament-like stuff really only appeals to the PvP crowd that are a vast minority. Now that being said, the PvP crowd is the most dedicated, and if you are a hardcore Temtem player, this is what you want the game to do. But let's just say, for example, this is 1% of the player base. I'm not quite sure if that's going to be enough to fund the game indefinitely. I recently made a poll on my channel, and while obviously the people on my channel are not indicative of the entire Temtem community, I did think it was a decent enough sample size, and roughly 80% of you guys wanted new islands and new Temtem, whilst the rest were divided with the game just sort of focusing on PvP. Some want holiday events, like something we'd see in Doodle World or Lumion Legacy. There's some people that said other, which you guys had some interesting comments as well, and then there was a very small amount that said they should just keep the game as is and not add anything. Now, one of the biggest challenges that the developers have stated regarding adding new islands in Temtem is they don't want to have any pay to win or pay for convenience elements in their game, and adding this would be tricky because if you make them paid expansions, you're giving other people advantages in PvP, and even if you do something like Pokemon did with its DLC and only lock the areas behind the paywall, not the Temtem itself, you still run into the pay for convenience aspect, because it's going to be a lot easier to breed something if you can actually go and counter it in the wild than if you have to get someone to trade it to you. This, however, could be fixed perhaps by making all the updates free and really ramping up their in-game shop, having new items for these new areas, having maybe Temtem skins, cosmetics, mounts, and stuff like that. If Temtem wasn't a game that is an MMO, it wouldn't really need anything of the sort, but the game does in fact need something to keep it continually bringing in money, otherwise it's going to fizzle out. A lot of hardcore fans will disagree because having it online makes it easier to detect cheating. When you take a look at the vast majority of players in the game, many feel like they're stuck with the downsides to an MMO, such as needing an online membership to whatever platform they're playing on, constantly needing to be online, so Switch owners can't really play their game portably, and not really seeing many of the benefits that generally come with most MMOs, because Temtem, while an MMO, is not developed like something like World of Warcraft or RuneScape, but instead is more like an RPG with MMO elements, if that makes sense. They have some MMO-esque features like the raids and the co-op, but it mainly just plays like a Pokemon game where you could see all of your friends. Now, to be fair, this is something that the developers have been very clear about. This was their vision for the game, but just because you're clear about something and that's what you want for the game doesn't mean that that thing is necessarily going to be good for the game itself. Lots of developers, including Crema, will make changes to their games based on the fan feedback. Like, for example, Lumas have been made much easier to encounter because while Crema wanted them to be harder, they understand that they have to balance rarity with enjoyability. Personally speaking, I mostly enjoyed the game for the single player experience, and the vast majority of players are the same. If the game wants to keep a large concurrent fan base, that's kind of what it needs to do, since most players are going to come back for PvE and expansions over PvP. Personally, I think that adding new islands and new Temtem with new story elements could be a lot of fun, but could also be very redundant as well, because we've already had every type themed in every island already. There's 6 islands, 2 types for each island, so they'd have to move away from that. And while the Temtem story isn't necessarily bad, it's also not something that carries the game either. There's also the level cap to consider. So if you don't expand the level cap past level 100, this would lead to no experience growth. That would lead to lack of progression. So you have a lot of things to do when considering constant expansions. They could also perhaps increase the level cap just for PvE, but that's another discussion to have. Personally, I think the way Temtem is built puts it in a little bit of an awkward camp, because while the game technically is an MMO, it doesn't really feel like an MMO in several different aspects. Most MMOs do feature these big expansions and a lot more multiplayer mechanics, and even if you look at something like RuneScape, you have a bunch of different types of things you can do, like mining, cooking, crafting, etc. You can level all of those up, while Temtem mostly just focuses on one thing: the Temtem themselves, getting better Temtems and battling them in PvP. I'd personally say that a Temtem 2 would probably be a better option than just continually expanding the game forever, but they do to some extent also have to worry about having a player base that's constant, otherwise the whole game won't be viable, because again, server costs are a thing. I've seen a lot of people say that the developers have stated that if the game dies out, they'll eventually make an offline mode. I cannot find that quote anywhere, but if that's the case, I mean, that's totally fair, but I can definitely see why some people are a little bit frustrated about how the game will work from a longevity standpoint. It's an MMO, but doesn't really commit to being an MMO, and it's a Pokemon-like game, but also has the downsides of being an MMO, so it really is sort of in this awkward stage that makes it extremely niche in terms of having a long-time player base. And I mean, if that's what the developers want, who am I to say otherwise? All that being said, this is a discussion that I wanted to have, and I really want to extend to you guys in the comments below. What sort of continued support do you think we should see for Temtem? And explain how you think that could potentially work and be viable given the circumstances I outlined in this video, such as server costs, the monetization model they're going with, etc. It's one thing to want them to do something a certain way, but you have to actually think, will it work? I don't really know. I thought I was going to have a concrete point by the end of the discussion, but as I got further into sort of talking about this, it's become more difficult to give a clear answer because there's so many upsides and downsides to every different option. Personally, I think new islands would be dope, but then I see the other side, which consists of a lot of negative aspects, and if these updates were free, then would they even make enough money through the battle pass to even justify it? Furthermore, if they don't add content that attracts the 80+% of their fan base, then those people won't be playing and won't be buying anything, and thus the game could fizzle out, but maybe the hardcore PvP community is enough to fund the servers, in which case, if they're happy just making enough to do that, who am I to say otherwise? I think that there's a lot that goes into game development that many fans of said games don't give the developers credit for, and I will right now say that this is a challenging prospect for the team. But that being said, there is an update coming on December 5th with Temtem Showdown. We'll see how the fan reception behind that is. It'll definitely make PvP more accessible, and I'll be there to cover it for you guys. If you do want to stay up to date on Temtem or just monster taming in general, definitely subscribe to my channel because I put out new videos every single day. You can check out my Twitter, my Discord, and my Patreon linked below. Special thanks to the patrons, especially Jim Hamilton, Dark Persona, Dro Ghost, and Exodus, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.